You don't talk to kids in kindergarten the same way you do to college graduates. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't make any sense. And most people, most human beings are in kindergarten spiritually. They're even in preschool spiritually, right? Because they, really, I mean, yeah, when you look at it, most people are born into a family and the family's part of a society, and the society has certain religions, and you're born into a family. If your family was Catholic, you're Catholic. If it was Jewish, you're Jewish. And you go to school, and what do you learn? You learn the basic teachings of that particular institutionalized religion. And that's the end of it for most people, right? Unfortunately, right? If you happen to be fortunate enough to be born in Tibet, when Tibet was when it had a holy city and it was a holy nation, it was run by a spiritual leader, right, with the Dalai Lama, and you were a child, you went to school, you learned spiritual teachings in kindergarten. You learn the things that most human beings never learn in their lives about the true reality of spiritualism, right? So that's not even the case anymore because, Tibet was taken over mostly by the Chinese, and the Dalai Lama is living in exile in India. He's still teaching the teachings and so forth. But even in the Tibetan teachings, there are higher forms of Tibetan teachings that are consistent with this business of Advaita, of direct transmission. And those higher teachings were reserved only for monks who had practiced meditation sufficiently to be able to comprehend those higher teachings. And they were kept from the people, the regular lay people, and they were kept from any monk who had not achieved a level of understanding that they could comprehend these teachings. At some point, however, that tradition was broken, for example, by Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi came along and said, there is no preparation necessary for waking up. And so he taught this direct approach to anybody that wanted it. And then once he taught it, there were other teachers that popped up that started to teach it, and then the cat was out of the bag. And so now this direct approach is available to people, and in this direct approach, there is no time, there is no sinning, there is no karma, there is no rebirth. This is it. You want to know what's real? This is real. And if you want to come out from the suffering of considering yourself to be a limited, separate entity from the rest of humanity, and if you want to come out from suffering from the emotional fear-based states that most people live their life in, and if you want to come out from suffering in terms of attempting as a person to make a life work when in fact the idea that you're a person is a mistake. And that's one of the things, recently, I have been really involved with studying Zen in detail. And one of the attractions to me with Zen is that it goes immediately to the mark. It doesn't mess around with getting into a whole lot of theoretical understanding and a lot of these teachings. No, it goes directly to the mark. The word Zen means meditation. So the Zen sect basically came along and said, just meditate. Just meditate. That's all you need to do is meditate. And the teaching in Zen, the first teaching in Zen is you are not a person. You are not a physical body. If you break that connection, if you succeed in breaking the programming that runs your brain and runs your mind that says you are this physical body and you are this person and personality and you live in time and space and you have a story that you're living in and you have a script that you're playing, if you break that, right, if you can break that connection successfully, then there's an opening for the truth to shine through. Then there is an opening for the awareness to start to come through and have an expression in your life and in your body and in your behavior. Yeah, and so that's the thing about this practice, is that meditation is the heart of the matter when it comes to Zen. And by practicing meditation along with having the understandings that can be had through the readings that are available now, That's another thing. Back in those days, they didn't have a lot of the sophisticated teaching that we have now. They didn't have a Rupert Spira. They didn't have an Eckhart Tolle. These are lay people that are teaching high spiritual teachings. They didn't have that. If you wanted spiritual teachings, you had to go and live in a monastery, and you had to practice for years until the higher priest said that you were ready, and then you were given the exclusive higher teaching. So this is a direct path, and this direct path makes it possible for anybody who is motivated to learn the highest spiritual teaching available. And then to practice that means that the possible experience of yourself as a spiritual being, the possible experience of enlightenment, is something that's available to anybody who's interested and willing to deal with the need to practice the practice and study the teaching, which is what we're doing here. A person reaches a certain state of awareness in which morality is a natural expression of that state, right? In other words, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not take your brother's goods, thou shalt, treat others the way you want to be treated. At a certain level of awareness, you don't need any laws to govern you. That's the way you are. That's the natural state, okay? Now, obviously, most of humanity is not in that state of awareness, okay? Therefore, you do need laws, to keep people down. Because once the way you are oriented is that you're separate from all other human beings, once that's there, right? And once you're put into a situation in which there is an evaluation and judgment going on all the time by you and everybody else, right? Once you're in that situation, and once you're plugged into time, and once you're plugged into the rest of the whole situation, right? Then it's every man for themselves. That's built into that situation, right? So once you're in the dark, I'll say it in terms of Star Wars, once you're under the influence of the dark force, right? Then you behave as a separate individual who believes that it makes sense to do whatever you have to do to get to the top of the heap. Okay? That's given by the ignorance of reality. It's given by the ignorance of reality. And most of humanity is living in an ignorant state in which that seems to be true and real, and therefore you have an explanation for the crazy behavior that we see all around us, right? Yeah, and so even though, and what I was trying to bring, even though the law is designed to try and control all that, right? It doesn't control all that, because the forces that compel people to behave go beyond what the law can deal with. I worked in prisons for 32 years. I worked with a lot of people that committed murder, right? And here's the deal. When I sat down and talked to these people, if you sat down and talked to these people, you would be shocked and surprised to hear what they did, because they don't appear to be some kind of insane person. They seem to be a pretty normal person. And when you get into the details with them about what they did, they explain to you that in the situation they were in, it didn't even occur to them that they were going to murder somebody. It wasn't something that occurred to them. And if it was something that occurred to them, more than not, what I found in people is there was a mental illness involved. Yeah. And so it goes back to, and now you go to this other piece that I am going to be the man that takes this one on in terms of talking about it more than I hear any other teachers talking about it other than Ramesh Balsekar, and he's not around anymore. That the heart of the matter with these teachings is to come to an understanding that you are a spiritual entity, right? And you are related to the source. But that relationship has been cut off by your thinking that you're a body, and that you're thinking that you live in time, and that you're thinking you're a person, and then you think you're the actor. You think you're causing what's happening, right? So what do we do with kids in school? In kindergarten, we are already teaching them, you're here to learn how to be controlled, and you're here to learn to do what it takes to make a good living and grow up and choose a vocation and get educated to do that job. That's what you're here for. So the first thing a child learns is you're an actor, you're a doer. You are going to either succeed based on your actions or fail. And we're here to help guide you in order to be successful that way. And now here we are from a spiritual perspective saying, that's not true. That is not true. And that's why if you hear thy will be done, it bounces right off your conditioning. It bounces right off your conditioning. Because that is so not like it is for you in terms of your conditioning, right? The idea that everything, and this is what I mean by that, the idea that everything that you think you ever did, you never did. The idea that you think everything you think you did that you might feel shamed about, right, or that you might feel guilty about, right, you didn't do, and therefore you have no shame and guilt, you can let them go, and this is the absolute truth. And everything that you're doing now is not coming from you, and therefore you need not worry about it. You need not carry the burden of responsibility about what to do, what to choose, how to act. No, that's coming from the source at all times, and the same thing is in the future. And then in addition to that, we have this predestination piece of it, right? And the way Ramesh Balsekar talked about that is he said, the film is already in the can. Everything that's going to happen in your life is already done. There's nothing about it that can be changed, right? And one of the ways the teachers talk about this, in fact, when I was studying with the Zen master a couple of weeks ago, he mentioned it. The reality of it is, it's like there's a wall. You know, if you're going to live 85 years, there's an 85-year-long wall of the incidents that are going to happen in those 85 years, right? And you're walking along the wall, experiencing what's on the wall at any particular moment in time. We believe in the opposite, right? That you're staying still and time is passing you. No, that's not the case. Time has already been predetermined and is now. I know when I say that, right, that sounds wild to most people, right? At the same time, if you practice these practices and you study these teachings and you include that in these teachings and you can get to a place where you can see from there, and you can get to a place where you can see from that there is no actor, right, that thy will be done, that you can get to a place where you can see that everything that is occurring is predestined, and you're seeing from that place and you're being present with that type of awareness, you're liberated. That's peace of mind. You're free. That's nirvana. That's nirvana. That's what nirvana looks like, if you can be that way and see things. And so that's part of the practice. So when things happen, you can say thy will be done, right? And mean it. And you're saying it because you're looking at it that way, right? So it takes time for this to settle, for you to be able to let this come into your mind and into your brain. Whether we're talking about the idea of thy will be done and no free will, because that's what that means, or we're talking about that predetermination, right? We're talking about those things, but we're also talking about the fundamental practice of meditation is a practice of experiencing that you're not the physical body. Very important. That's just as important as experiencing that there is no time and experiencing that there's no free will and experiencing that there is no nothing can change, everything's predetermined. But that includes, as I said, I think in the last class, but that includes the fact that if you're here and you're doing these practices, right, the fact that the activity that you're involved with does change your conditioning. It does change your conditioning. So nothing can change, but nothing has to change for that to change because that's part of what's preset, you see? Yeah, the Buddha gave those teachings because he understood that most people could not practice and could not experience and could not see the truth. So what do? You gotta, it's like a little child, right? A little child needs structure. You have to tell the child what to do. You have to give them structure. They're only happy when they have the structure because they don't know what to do, right? And people are like, most human beings are like children. They need structure. So the Buddha gave rules for people to live by, and those rules are consistent with the way they would behave if they were awake and could see things as they really are. The way they would behave if they were awake and knew who they really are. You know, one of the things that The teacher I was with a couple of weeks ago, his teacher, who was a Japanese Zen master, said to him in regard to this very subject about, because, monks have to take vows. And if you think the laws that govern human behavior for pedestrians are a lot, they have hundreds of vows that they have to take and keep, right? And so you might say the same thing. Well, why would you do that? Why would you tell them that instead of just helping them to evolve to a point where they naturally behave that way? Well, the answer to that is because they haven't naturally evolved to the point where they'll behave that way, and they need to be able to behave, and they need to be able to be a model for other people who don't have all of those vows to behave, and so they're playing a role in that regard. But the teacher says that when you become enlightened, when you fully realize your potential to be a spiritual being, those rules are not necessary. That's just the way you are. That's just the way you are. But it goes back to, that's just the way you are for the people who have experienced that. Most people haven't, and then you have to play the other game. You have to play the other game. You can't trust people to behave well because they don't know who they are. That's why. Well, they don't want to because they don't know who they are. They don't want to because they don't see reality for what it is. It's ignorance. It's ignorance, right? If you think, for example, this is about as simple as you can get. You've heard the idea what goes around comes around, right? Yeah. That's not even karma. That's just the way it is, right? If you think that you get away with anything in this life, you're naive. That's naive. And if you understand the truth, and you understand that there's nothing that you ever get away with in life, there are consequences to everything. If you understand that, that's what keeps you in line. That's all. That's what keeps you in line, because you know what the truth is. And if you know the truth about who you are, and if you know the truth about what reality is, that's an easy life to live, because it's your natural way of being. It's just a natural way of being. That's all. So there is a lot to learn, right? And there's a lot to study, and there's a lot to practice. But the possibility is real, yeah. And if you take on the responsibility for the truth, and you're willing to do the practice, and you're willing to study these things, all will be yours. That's the promise. That's the promise. It can't be otherwise, because one of the fundamental truths, especially in the Advaita Vedanta teachings, right, in the non-dual teachings, one of the fundamental truths is that this is already so. The truth is already so. You are already who you are. So you're not going to achieve anything. You're not going to accomplish anything, right? You're going to start paying attention to what's not actual, what's not real, that you thought was actual and was real. And by seeing that, that starts to drop away. You stop believing in Santa Claus, right? And then the truth of reality becomes apparent to you. It just becomes apparent. But the first thing you have to do is you have to see things as they are. You have to stop practicing lies. You have to stop operating. And you and I know that when you walk out of here and you get back on that highway, you're going to be put to the test again. So the question is, that's one of the things about these practices and teachings. You don't have to go to a monastery. No, you're better off learning about this and practice these things in the middle of your active life where the challenges are. To go and live in a monastery is no challenge. No. But to live in an urban center and with all the challenges that we face, and to watch the 6:30 news every night and not throw up is something that's very challenging, right? So if you take these practices and you apply them to that stuff, right? You apply them to your own psychological well-being, you apply them to the situations you find yourself in, then you see how they work. Then you're convinced, and then you're willing to really put the time into it and really put the intention into it that's necessary to fully realize this. And if you succeed before the body dies, you get to live. If you succeed before the body dies, you don't die. The truth is, as far as these teachings are concerned, the truth is you don't die anyway. See, here's the thing, here's the tragedy. If in reality you don't die anyway, if in reality there is actually no such thing as death, right, then it means for you ignorant people, you'll be terrified and suffer right up until your last breath because you think you are going to die. And then you don't die. That's such a waste. Don't forget, this doctor that was a famous doctor, he worked in the ICU. He said on one night, very, very extreme situation, never happened before. On one night, they had 3 people come in that were resuscitated, that were clinically dead when they came in to the emergency room, and 3 people in one night were brought back to life. And what this doctor said, he said it blew my mind completely, because in all 3 people, at different times in the evening, totally different people, but in all 3 cases, they all said the exact same thing once they were retrieved. And it was, why did you bring me back? So how can there be death if people are complaining about having to come back? And if that's true, but you have to do these practices and everything to have the experience of it being true, so you can really relax when the body dies, right? Then you will have achieved the great thing, like Jesus Christ said, life everlasting, right? But if you don't come to see it as true and you don't experience the truth of that, then you waste the beauty and the value of this life being afraid of nothing. Of nothing, because nothing can hurt who you really are, like the Course in Miracles says. What is real cannot be threatened, and what is unreal doesn't exist. And I can tell you that all the things that you're afraid of do not exist, including death. So I can't top that tonight. All right, see you next time.